What's up, gentlemen? This is Rising Phoenix Podcast, a podcast about how to rise up after your divorce. I'm your host, divorce coach Michael Rhodes. Let's get into it. Joining me today is Fern Schumer Chapman. Fern, let's just jump right into it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I am an author and I've written several books. Most of them are based upon my lived experience, including my two most recent books, which are about sibling estrangement. I was estranged from my only brother for decades, and only in the last 15 years ago or so have I been able to reconcile and sustain that reconciliation. I also do one-on-one coaching with those who are struggling with sibling relationships, and listeners can reach me through my website, fernschumerchapman.com.
Gotcha. Well, man, like I said, rabbit holes could appear. I'll avoid this one, but I have a strange relationship with my youngest brother. My middle brother sadly passed away. We were estranged too. It's a long and complicated story, perhaps for another podcast episode. But the reason I reached out to you is you wrote a blog post for psychologytoday.com and you addressed betrayal blindness. And when I was sort of telling you before we started, when I initially saw this, my thoughts were that this was probably a good thing to cover because some men are betrayed at the end of a marriage in various ways, and that unfortunately, for whatever reason, and I'd love that maybe we could dive into this perhaps, but for some reason these men see these women as perfect, and they just need to get them back, and they just, despite like whatever the betrayal was, and they're like, they are blind. But then I read it a little bit more, and it goes a little bit deeper, so and a little different than I expected. So but let's cover it first. I like to define things here. What is betrayal blindness?
Betrayal blindness is this practice, which many are absolutely unaware of, where they simply do not see a pattern of behavior that's right in front of them, plain and obvious to anyone else in their lives. And basically, they're wearing blinders, refusing to see the events or the realities because it threatens a crucial attachment in their lives. And if they actually look at it, they would have to do something about it. And they resist that. And so they keep those blinders on. And really, it's an extreme state of denial. When they finally open their eyes, they are in a state of shock and fear and anger and pain.
Man, it leads to so many questions. I was just taking some notes. So my first initial question or thought was, how do you know if that's where you're at, if you're in sort of this blindness? But
Well, that's actually the trick of it, isn't it? Because if
yeah,
you can't see it, how would you know?
right.
Well, and here's the other really interesting thing is that most people who are in this state swing between some sense of awareness and then they run back to unawareness. And that's because they simply cannot face addressing the issues in the relationship. And I should say that this happens in all kinds of intimate relationships, where an individual derives a sense of identity or belonging. So that would be a marriage or partnership, parent-child, a sibling relationship. Women actually experience betrayal blindness more often than men.
Yeah,
And that's an interesting
that is
part of it
interesting.
as
Yeah, that's very interesting. I saw that in your blog and I was like, huh. Because I see the other end of that spectrum, at least, with the narrow lens of guys going through a divorce. Typically unwanted. The numbers bear it out. Women are filing at a much, much higher rate than men. So I see it sort of from a different view. But that's interesting. But so after I read it, it led me to think, and this is one of my questions, is what causes your eyes to become open? Because what it feels like in some ways, or what I felt after I read your blog, is that perhaps, and listen, I'm going to call a spade a spade. I probably wasn't the best partner, and I wonder if she was blind to some of my shenanigans, especially early on. I was a baby, I was a child, and not as an excuse, not even age, just my maturity. I was a child. I behaved like a child. And so I think I probably put her through a lot of crap. No, I grew up once we started having kids. I feel like I grew up and I tried to make up for all my shenanigans, but I wonder after reading it, I wondered, was I the betrayer? Was she blind to it? And then suddenly she opened her eyes, and that's what led to her sort of, because then, although I think she focused on mostly past behaviors, she really focused on those behaviors like she hadn't before. And so like, it's like her eyes were opened in a way. I don't know how to explain it. That it makes sense in my brain, but that's a scary place. But do you think that, does that sound plausible and feasible?
Well, I mean, I
Yeah,
have some really strong opinions about all this, partly because I also was married to the father of my children, and I am now divorced and remarried. And unfortunately, we make very important lifelong decisions at a very early age,
yeah,
long before we've reached maturity.
yeah,
And so it's a setup in a lot of ways for challenges and possibly failure. And I mean, I have a whole set of concerns about the institution of marriage.
yeah,
But and what I really don't like about it, just as from a personal point of view, is that when these marriages don't work, somehow we feel we failed. When we grow and change, we feel we're trapped.
yeah,
And it does not, if you're with a partner who can't grow with you, you're really stuck without a place to go. And it almost feels like it punishes growth, which is terrible.
yeah,
But to answer your question about betrayal blindness, I think it requires mindfulness and awareness. And most of us don't take the time to truly reflect
yeah,
on our behaviors and others' behaviors until we're forced to. And then when we do, we open our eyes. Now, let me just say one quick thing. I became fascinated with this topic of betrayal blindness when I was coaching individuals who are suffering with sibling estrangement. And one person after another was telling me about their situation, and I would ask questions like, well, what cues did you see earlier in life that might have led to the pattern you're seeing now?
mm,
And nobody could identify it because they had put on those blinders.
yeah. I think it's so,
So
yeah, there's
that's
so,
how.
sorry. Yeah, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you there. There's so much to this. Gosh. Okay. So, uh, I think I'll tackle the I think the core, right, is self-worth, right? And we talk about sort of like, or you talk about in the blog, sort of like, um, not wanting to destroy the relationship, because that's, this is true for men for sure, in terms of the identity. I'm a father, I'm a husband, and if I lose that stuff, then I lose me. So is that, this sounds like very protectionary of the self, because the self is so fragile, right? If you have a stronger sense of self-worth, then someone leaves you, yeah, it hurts, but it's like, okay, I'll be fine. There's other fish in the sea, or I'll heal, or whatever, right? But it sounds like this poor self-worth. So your identity is attached to someone else and something else, and then therefore you'll overlook the crap just to protect that fragile self. Is that it sound? I mean, that's right, right?
Uh, I mean, I think you're being a little harsh on yourself. I actually think that in the past, this behavior was simply labeled denial. But recent research on attachment, affect regulation, and the mind-body connection has revealed a much more complex foundational purposes for these behaviors.
Yeah,
And actually, it's a form of the freeze response. So what happens is an individual goes numb, learning to ignore that early inner warning system that prompts them to pay attention to troubling behavior. And without that awareness, the individual continues to sustain the relationship as if it were safe, and never confronts the loved one or never withdraws from that relationship. So I hope that clarifies it for you. It's really very much a function of the brain's ability have two to have two parts operating at the same time. The brain is very complex and very clever, and it adapts to all kinds of challenging circumstances. And this adaptation of awareness allows the individual to be in like a dual state of simultaneously knowing and not knowing something at the same time. And so it's really important to recognize that this is rooted in attachment.
Yeah.
In infancy, we are very dependent
Sure.
on other people. And then at the same time, we are constantly as adults creating social contracts with other people so that we get our needs met. And these two aspects of our humanity serve us well. But when the person we're dependent on actually betrays us, we get into all sorts of trouble. And these two factors conflict with one another.
Yeah, I agree, and I believe that's true, and I think that's essentially what I'm saying. But I think that if you had a secure attachment, if you had a strong sense of self-worth, then it wouldn't hit you as hard. You wouldn't. I don't think. I'm speculating, of course. I don't think you would be so blind because you have
Yeah,
the
I agree with you.
self-worth.
I agree with you. Because freezing is our response from trauma.
Yeah, for sure.
And trauma, of course, is tied into self-worth and
Yeah,
self-esteem.
sure. So
Yes,
yeah, the question I think that I again, my initial reaction to your blog, and then when I read it was totally different. It was so funny. I was like, oh, we're gonna talk about this. And then I read it, I was like, oh, we're gonna talk about this. So how does one open their eyes then? So I feel like for this is generalizing, and I hate doing that, but for my story and for other stories, it always seems like there's an outside influence that opens the eyes to the situation. And usually another partner, another person sort of trying to, make their way into the relationship, or to, to steal them, or whatever language you want to use. And that sort of gets them to start maybe not seeing it, because you said it's like you see it but you don't see it, but I think it allows them to sort of bring it to the forefront, and because they're safer because now they have another attachment. Does that make any sense? Am I making sense? I feel like I'm making sense.
yeah, although as I pointed out to you, I also see this in sibling estrangement where there isn't necessarily a third party. So this is something that obviously occurs in many intense, intimate connections. To answer your question about how do you become aware,
Yeah.
obviously we talked about mindfulness. A therapist would be of great help.
Yes.
And there are therapists out there who actually specifically deal with this, and they ask really crucial questions like, if I were to face this issue, what would I have to feel? What would change for me? What scares me about it? What would I potentially lose? What support do I need around me in order to look at these issues? And what will help me feel strong enough to deal with this? But the other thing that I always encourage people to do is, and actually I've written a book for sibling estrangement that is a workbook and a journal, because writing and journaling offers an avenue into some of those feelings. And people get really intimidated, especially when I say writing, because I am a writer, but I'm not talking about crafted writing. I'm talking about emotional writing. 20 minutes a day where you pour your heart out on the page for no one else to read. And it brings you in touch. There are two advantages. It brings you in touch with your deep feelings. But the other thing that nobody recognizes is when you put it on the page, you don't feel the obligation to carry it around and ruminate quite as much because it's recorded and it's on the page.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, journaling is, I don't do it as much as I should, but that's true of a lot of things, but I definitely always recommend it. And I do, if there are times of strife, I definitely did in the beginning of this. You gotta pour your heart out. It doesn't necessarily mean to another person, although that can be therapist, best friend, whatever. support group. But you got to get it out, and you know, I think it allows you to gain some clarity, perhaps, to the situation. Yeah, I think there's few things better than just getting it out. You can't keep it in. You got to get it out.
Well, I think what you're really saying is you have to be vulnerable.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
What we're talking about is a very rigid approach where you're constantly denying what you see
yeah,
and then actually opening yourself up to vulnerability and allowing yourself to feel sad and disappointed and betrayed. So that's hard to do, but it's crucial in order to live an authentic life.
yeah. I think it's hard because I think we're so programmed. I don't know if that's the right word, but I think so. I mean, our brains are programmed for connection. We want to maintain connection. I talked about this with the gentleman I interviewed a couple days ago, where it's part of our mentality, our DNA, where we needed to be part of a tribe in order to survive way back when, right? And so if we did anything to ostracize ourselves, then we probably would have died. And so we have this
Right.
really strong urge to overlook things, to stay connected, but sometimes it is to our detriment. So okay, so the question then, I guess, is, and I think I know the answer, which I love. How do you make sure you don't do it again? So let's say you had a marriage, and she was a chronic cheater, because I read these things and see it. I don't know the whole story, right? I have half of it, but from what I read, I've seen chronic cheaters, but yet this gentleman is still enraptured with this woman, and still longing for her and needing her, and that's my identity and all these things. But then they do heal a little bit. How do they make sure, best they can, that they don't repeat this same sort of scenario?
Well, all of life is a journey of growth, we hope.
Mm.
And you learn from each terrible experience. You probably would never wish it on anybody
No,
else,
amen.
but that doesn't mean that you haven't changed as a result of the relationship and the experience. And it's a little bit, I talk a lot about narcissism because a lot of sibling estrangement is rooted in narcissism. And so many people have said the same thing to me, which is once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I think it applies to what you're saying here, and that is
Mm.
that once you become aware of something like this, you know the red flags and you know what you're looking at, and don't rush into things. Take your time so that you actually know the person you're getting involved with.
Yeah, I think I was thinking that part of it probably is being mindful, right? And gosh, I think I talk about this, especially lately. I feel like I've really talked about this a lot, about, but I think it's true in general. Something I've discovered, which maybe to others is like, how did you not know this? But like, you really got to pay attention to your thoughts and your actions, and reflect on them. Like, you can't just, I think a large part of us go through life on autopilot, because life is stressful, man. Modern life is stressful, and like, there's so many things that amp up that stress, that the rest of it you just sort of want to coast through, you know. But we can't do that. To the best of our abilities. We need to be more mindful of what we're thinking for sure, and then what we're doing for sure, and then what other people are doing and thinking, or not thinking, but what they're doing, what their actions are. Pay attention. It's challenging for sure, but I think it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize the difference between attraction and long-term relationships. You can be attracted to any number of people, and
Mm,
you may think you can't live without this person,
right.
but who is this person?
Yeah. I was thinking, it's funny because I was thinking about that a lot lately. Just yesterday, I think, you mentioned growth, and people, growing up, not growing with you and stuff. And I really think about, I think, and I try to be mindful. I try not to be delusional, or I try not to have rose-colored glasses on, or only look in the mirror and see perfection or whatever, right? I try to be as true as I can be, and I think, did I grow in a way that she didn't? And I've been thinking about that a lot lately, and I think so. She is not, was not. I don't think she is anywhere. It's been 4.5 years. 4 years and change, maybe 7 months. I don't know. And as far as I know, she's never gone to therapy. She's not reading self-help books, and I don't think that absolutely positively means you're growing or you're interested in growth, but I think it is a clue where I've taken classes and courses, and I went to life coaching school, and I went through different programs and different therapists and different modalities. And I mean, I dove in. And even before that, I was definitely a believer in therapy, a believer in reflection. And I think that's why I went from a guy who was out at the bar every night, getting shit faced in my late 20s, even early 30s, to a guy who rarely goes to a bar anymore. Right? Even now when I absolutely have the opportunity, I typically don't. So I think that there's something to be said about if you reflect on these things in life in general, and you look at these things as best you can. Maybe it's possible that you grew in a way that she didn't. But is that if you want to talk about your experience, do you think that that's what occurred with you?
Yeah, mine was a lot more complicated, in that we were very different from each other,
Mm.
and culturally we were different.
Mm.
And I think it was much more challenging than I ever anticipated to bridge those differences. And then honestly, I had a successful book, which I felt should have been the celebration of a lifetime.
Sure.
And a lot of the competitive behaviors and the issues were exposed through that. So rather
Well,
than thrilled, I didn't feel the support.
yeah, well, and I guess that I think that speaks to, but that could be growth, right? Like you're growing, you're trying things, you're getting, your successes, whatever, and he's not experiencing that, and was resentful. So I think that again, it sort of speaks to growth being such an important. You got to find someone that's willing to grow with you. Is what I'm
Well,
saying.
and you don't always know. You might
Yeah.
think at that moment in time that this person will grow with you, but then life happens, things change. A lot of unexpected occurrences, and as a result, your partner may not respond the way you wanted or the way you need.
Mm.
And so, then that was to some extent what happened to me. So yes, you're right. There was growth on one side and maybe growth on his side, but it certainly wasn't in the same direction as so we didn't share it. But I also want to say something else, because in
Sure.
our exchanges, you said something about words of wisdom. And I really am grateful to you to have the opportunity to talk about this, because as somebody who's been divorced for a long time, I feel like I can shed some light.
Sure.
Children, I have 3 children. Children are very important in a marriage or divorce.
Sure.
And I have made an effort, and I know this is going to sound impossible to many of your listeners. I have made a concerted effort to be inclusive in every way that I can, so that my children, whose needs come first in my mind, can be with their both parents at different occasions, whether it's a birthday party or a holiday celebration. Are we best friends? No.
Yeah.
But I can make the best of it, because I don't want my children to suffer any more than they have. And I would encourage all your listeners to think about that and put your children's needs before your own.
Yeah, it's the right thing to do, but it is sometimes so fucking hard because if you're the one who was betrayed, it's like I don't want to talk to that bitch. I don't want to be around her. I don't want to
Um,
breathe the same
I know.
air. It's really
I
hard.
know.
But you're not
Okay,
wrong.
but
You're not
But
wrong.
let me say this. So in sibling estrangement, oftentimes the best path is to pursue what's called a limited relationship.
Hmm.
So what does that mean? I live in Chicago. How
Oh.
about them Cubs? You
Right.
know, we are going to talk about the weather and the
Yeah.
sports and where
Yeah.
you've traveled, and that's it.
Yeah.
And my children are grown now, but they can have a birthday party or a celebration and not feel like they have to pick one or the other, which is extremely painful. Of course, I'm sure you've discussed all this in previous episodes, but also never speaking
Yeah.
against the former spouse.
Yeah, no, that's definitely like one of the cardinal rules. I don't know that I adhered to it early, very, very, very early on, like even before she left. And I definitely try to avoid it. I'm sure it sprinkles in, but I do try to avoid it because, as my buddy Chris says, he's my Obi-Wan Kenobi, if you will, and I love that I called him that. He told me a long time ago, when you badmouth the other spouse, the child knows inherently that they're half of that person, so you're cutting them down as well, and it's true. But initially, when I know for me, I was so self-righteous in my anger, and that I behaved poorly for sure. Not anything crazy, but I definitely misspoke, mishandled myself for sure. I was so angry. God, I was so angry. Because
I know,
I felt so
but it's,
betrayed.
I know, and we all make mistakes.
Mm.
And my point to you is it's never too late to change that approach.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I'm much better now with her in the interaction. Like she was actually in my house. This is I stayed in the marital home. She was actually in the house yesterday. She came to pick up the girls, and I was like, oh, you can come in. I don't really care anymore. There are still moments where it hurts. For sure. The holidays are this is my fifth year, and it still has moments of nothing like the first year or maybe even the second year. It's more sadness that pops up on occasion because it is sad. I had a family and now I don't, and that's sad. It is sad. I have to embrace that. I can't keep running from it. Um, but it's gotten. I hate that. It gets better with time. I hate that phrase because I think it's misleading. But it has gotten better. But man, I put in a lot of work in. But I definitely have I've tried to seize this opportunity to be a better person and try to how do I want to behave? I don't want her to be able to make me angry because that means she's controlling me. I'm a puppet on the strings, right? I think if she can affect my mood and my behaviors, then I'm not in charge. She is, and I don't want that. But boy, is that really hard. Um, it's really
And
hard. This whole
I just
uh,
want to make one small correction for you in how you're thinking. You still have a family.
yeah. I mean, I have my girls. It's not the same.
That's
I
a
mean,
very important role.
well,
So,
sure, sure, yeah. I mean,
so I mean, it's reorganized,
yeah, sure
but
is.
but that doesn't mean your role isn't crucial to those
Oh
goals because
no, yeah, no, I don't think that. It's just I think it's the. I tell you one thing that, and the I always feel like the good episodes feel like a bit of a therapy session. So thank you. I tell you one of the things that's hard is to be around coworkers, and you don't. I don't think you realize it until you're divorced, but when you're around other folks, my goodness, do they talk about their spouse all of the time, and it's so hard sometimes to be like, yeah, okay, I heard about your wife. That's great. I don't give a shit. I mean, I know it sounds terrible, but it reminds you of your loss and stuff. So it's challenging to navigate all of this stuff. How long, if you don't mind, how long ago did you have your divorce? How long ago was it? Like,
oh, it's been a long time, probably 20 years or so. So
wow.
it's been a long time. My children were in their teenage years
Mm,
and I've since remarried and none of this is easy.
no, it
And
sure is.
I have and in fact you'll laugh, I did not want to remarry in
Mm,
any way. I felt betrayed by the institution. I didn't
sure.
see the value of it. And
Amen.
my current husband really pressed me by saying that I don't want your children to never take me seriously and see me as an important figure in their lives. I'm just going to be the, so to speak, boyfriend.
Right.
And he didn't like that.
Mm,
And eventually I caved.
mm.
And I have to say, I'm the most suspicious person of marriage you'll ever meet. And I actually happen to be the most happily married person I know.
So let's talk about that a little bit about the institution of marriage because you mentioned it earlier, and I agree, and I think sadly I agree because I think There's a part of me that says there. I mean, this is multifaceted, right? There used to be a time when the divorce was pretty rare. It was also a time when women were they didn't have the opportunities they have now. And I have two daughters, so I'm all about equality and all that good stuff. Go find your own way. But a long time ago that wasn't the case. They were essentially homemakers or whatever. They were in some ways dependent upon the man who was the breadwinner in terms of finances and stuff like that. If they left, where would they go and how would they survive and all those things, right? And so that probably was part of the glue that held marriages together. Nowadays, it's not that dynamic doesn't exist, or it's pretty rare, right? Women are able to there's obviously some stats on disparity in pay and stuff, but largely women are able to make their own way. But I do think that I'm not saying that's bad, but I do think that could lead to, and maybe does, the lack of the glue that part of the glue that holds a marriage together. And so I like you, I don't know. I went on this date maybe a year and a half ago, and she was basically like, relationships just don't last, people. And I'm just like, that's why would I get in a relationship with you if that's your, and I'm not saying she's wrong, but why would I get a relationship with someone if that's the mindset? And I worry that is the mindset in general. And then so people don't, where is the commitment? Where is the but maybe it never existed, or maybe it existed because outside forces. I don't know. I don't know.
A lot of people stay together and they're miserable.
Yeah.
Just because there's an intact family and your coworkers are talking about how much they love their spouse or how great it is, a lot of times
Yeah.
people are in marriages and they're staying for the kids, or
Yeah.
they're staying because of their cultural demands.
Mm.
Culture does not tolerate divorce.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of fantasy, and certainly we're fed this
Oh,
by Hollywood.
yeah. Yeah.
And um,
Agreed.
it's important. That's why I said to you earlier, it's so important to know who you're with
Yeah.
rather than just be attracted to that person. Like I said, who are you attracted to and why? And
Yeah.
what do you value? Because I think
Mm.
they're, unfortunately, before people get married, they really don't talk about their differences. And I was as guilty of that as anyone.
Yeah.
Oh, everything will be fine.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Once we're married, we'll work it out. And it's true, you can't tackle it all beforehand, but you could go into it with a better understanding of the issues you're going to face.
Yeah. Do you think that? I think I had this conversation with some fellows recently, last night actually. Have a support group, and we were having this conversation. Is the institution of marriage? It certainly seems like it's dying is probably a strong word, but it seems like it's not doing well. Let's put it that way. Do you think eventually that it won't exist? And then I don't know. There's a sadness to that to me, not because of but marriage, the institution, but the fact that people can't work their shit out. It seems. It seems like, and I get this is the broader question, but it seems like people just give up way too easy. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I don't know, cynical is
Well,
the right word, but
I don't think there's so many answers I want to give you, but I don't think strong communication skills are modeled in families. And as
that's
a
true.
result, people don't know how to negotiate differences.
Yeah.
So, I specialize in sibling estrangement,
Mm.
and a lot of my clients come to me and they have no idea of how to actually sit down and
Yeah.
have a
Yeah.
conversation and actively listen and hear what somebody else is experiencing.
Yeah.
And so this leads to a fragmentation in the relationship and a fraying of the relationship, which ultimately can be disastrous. So I think the second piece I want to say to you, and again, you're talking about marriage, and I'm talking about in general family.
Sure.
The absolute nature of family in Western culture is changing.
Yeah.
And that includes mobility,
Mm.
it includes divorce rates, um, it includes where children live compared to their parents, that kind of thing. And my point in saying this to you is I think you have to look at the broader scheme, and in general, the family's changing.
Is that a good thing? I mean, maybe it's just a thing. Maybe it doesn't have to be good, but I'm just, I
Well,
don't
I
know.
think it's a reflection of exactly what you were saying earlier, that it no longer serves the same purpose it did at one time. The other piece of this that we haven't discussed is, back in the day, people died in their 50s, 60s.
No, that's true.
So, and now the requirement of a long-standing marriage might be 70 years. I mean, there aren't many people like Jimmy and Rosalind Carter.
Right. Yeah. And is that, again, I guess I come to, is that a good thing? And I don't know if there's an answer, maybe there isn't. But to me, there's a sadness to that, but I think I understand it. Like who's the same for 70 years or 20 years or, whatever, right? We
So,
all change, but there's a certain sadness there to me that there isn't a long-term, there's less of a likelihood of a long-term relationship nowadays than there used to be for various reasons, but it seems sad to me. Maybe I'm wrong.
years ago, I encountered a couple, and this couple, and this is long before 2023, we're talking about maybe in the 90s or so.
Mhm.
And this couple reenacted their commitment to one another every 5 years.
Mm,
And they were married, but they asked each other every 5 years, do we want to stay married? How do we want to change?
yeah,
What does our future look like?
that's awesome.
And the reason I mention this to you is I asked her directly, why do you do this? And she said that it's a way in which we don't take each other for granted.
Mm,
And I thought that was so interesting
yeah.
because there's this tendency in marriages to get very
Oh yeah.
lazy
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yep.
comfortable
Yep.
and take your partner for granted.
Yeah.
Well, if you're if you're up for renewal every 5 years, you might think again.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think I wish I would have taken that approach. Gosh, I wish and to make no mistake about it, I'm not blaming society or anything. I think there are outside things that are changing and that is influencing people and whatnot. But my situation was my situation and I handled it poorly. Not that I wasn't solely at fault. She had her faults as well. But I think that's a wonderful idea. It's almost like a driver's license or whatever. Like you gotta renew every five. I love that. I think but I guess there's one component, and I'm really not like one of those guys that's like, oh yeah, but what about this? But the what bothers me about it, I mean, it bothers me in general, or it not bothers me, but it's sad. I think that people don't stay together for the long term anymore. Various influences and factors and all that kind of good stuff. But I think if you have kids, I think that should be the one. And I don't think you should stay miserable, but work it out, figure it out. But like, I think that and maybe you can speak to it a little bit if you choose to. I think divorce is hard on kids for sure, and I, it seems to me if you're going to have children, you should. And maybe this is like a larger societal thing. We need classes. We need 5-year renewals. We need things to facilitate these relationships staying together. But I think if you have kids I think it's better if you stay together if it's a good relationship. And I think it's inherent upon you
Well,
to try and fix it. That's what I
it
think.
is, it is and it isn't. And I'm going to offer you this perspective. You are modeling a pattern of what looks like a normal, healthy relationship. And if you're chronically fighting
Mm,
and
that's true.
creating an environment of hostility and stress, this is not healthy for children.
Yeah, no,
And
true.
it's probably best for you to make a change. I read a statistic recently that people don't go to marriage counseling until
Yeah,
7 years past the moment that they need to actually see a marriage counselor.
yeah,
And so, people are not jumping on this and saying, I'm unhappy.
yeah,
We need to work through
yeah.
this. Let's get a third party. They're not doing that. They're simply living with it. And then in the end, they get flooded with these terrible feelings that they can't be around that person and they have to leave.
And I get this again. It's just, I mean, full circle, right? Let's bring it back, right? But this is in a way what we began this conversation about: betrayal
Right.
blindness. Like you don't see it, but you do see it because you don't. But you don't see it because you don't want to see it because your attachment system won't let you see it or whatever, right? That's essentially what occurs.
Right. And so you keep those blinders on and you don't get help. because you don't recognize it. And then the next thing you know, you're in divorce court.
I think there should be a much more focus in schools, and I don't know what age. I'm not an expert,
I
but
agree.
it's at conflict resolution, at attachment styles, at love languages, at life skills. I mean, I'm all for
I
math and
agree.
science and all that kind of good stuff. Sure, whatever. But man, we need to teach people this stuff because I think it would really
I
help us
agree.
to have those long relationships.
And I think it's so important because for people raised in dysfunctional homes, they will replicate.
Mm,
That's what they do. So in other words, if your daughters are in a stressful, miserable situation and wounded by their mother or you, they're going to go out and find the person who makes them feel exactly the way
uh,
the person,
yeah,
right.
yeah,
And so it's really important that in high school, there's some sort of classes in social skills, emotional intelligence, red
yeah,
flags for narcissism,
yeah,
uh, how to communicate, how to
yeah,
listen. These things so basic,
yeah,
but they're not being
uh,
modeled in the society or in the home. And as a result,
yeah,
we have a lot of people going into the holidays who are not sitting at the family table.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's it caused me to pause. Just think about you know what what they could repeat or experience or whatever, and then that's very sad. But I think it's also motivating because it's like, okay, well, I have the ability to make sure that I now model it better. Now, obviously, I don't have a spouse. I can't model that type of stuff, right? But I can be better, much better at modeling communication and stuff in the household now. Like I can show them how to
Right.
be. So it is again, I say this all the time. It's an opportunity. This divorce thing, it sucks, but it is an opportunity to be a better person, but also to pass along better things to our children. As shitty as it is.
As the parent, and I think current parenting guides tell you this all the time, which is children need to be able to recognize their feelings.
Mm,
So it's your job, to help them recognize, I'm sad, I'm disappointed, I'm frustrated. But the other piece of it is they have no ability to regulate themselves. And
mm,
so they throw tantrums because their whole system is going haywire.
mm,
And instead of getting angry at children for that, it's really important to sit with them and feel with them and let them know what it is that is happening and help them through it so that they can do that for themselves. Because essentially what you're doing is you're downloading an emotional regulatory system into your child's brain.
yeah. Yeah, and we haven't had the best model for them, clearly. But we can change that, right? You can always make changes. I don't think
You
it's
know what?
ever.
I changed a lot. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I felt like I never was able to fully transmit who I was to my children because I did not feel authentic in my marriage.
Mm,
And my kids were in their teen years and I felt they didn't know me.
yeah,
And so that day, when I got out of the marriage, I decided they are going to know me in the new for who I am. And I started to be me.
yeah,
And it's taken a long time, but for better or worse, they accept me now, at least for who I am and not who I'm trying to be and pretzeling
mhm,
myself to something I'm not.
yeah. Well, again, it is the opportunity of a lifetime in some ways, to reinvent yourself, to be different, to behave in the way you want to, or whatever, right? It is an opportunity for that. It's a shitty opportunity, right? I interviewed a guy, I
Well,
think.
that's growth. That is
Yeah,
just what it is.
that's true.
And,
That's true.
I think we've talked a little bit about this, but it's so important how you look at it.
Yeah,
You can look at it as
yeah,
a misery
right.
and as a harsh punishment, or you can look at this as something that didn't work out for you, but you are going to work with what you've got and, like you said, become your best self
Yeah.
and model for your children, and take some chances to see if you can develop another relationship.
Yeah. Well, oh boy, that's a whole other podcast
I-
episode about trying to find someone, and it's not it's not been fun or successful. Clearly, I'm still single. It's yeah, that's a whole other podcast episode. But listen,
Well,
I want
I,
to go. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, well, contrary to you, I am not single anymore.
True.
And I did find a much healthier relationship for myself.
Yeah, I mean it's possible. It's just it hasn't gone well yet, and that could be I'm not blaming. There's a lot of factors. I who knows what they are. I mean I know some of them, but I mean I it just hasn't been successful yet. Will it? Yeah, I don't. I hope so in some ways. I really would like sort of a do over in some ways. Like I want to see all this growth that I think I've experienced. Have I really? And I don't know until I'm in an intimate relationship. I think so. I feel like things have ended with particular females because I've been better about communicating. I wouldn't overlook things, and it would I would bring things up and be like, this is kind of a thing for me, and that bothers me, and then that would cause it to end because but I think that's not a bad thing, right? If you find something that's not working for you and you're able to express it, I just think that that's a good thing. But I'd
I
rather.
personally feel growth is always positive, even though it's
Sure.
painful.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's there's a you know sort of the no pain no gain type of thing. Like you stress your muscles, it's painful. You work out, it's hard, right? But that was what leads to physical growth, and I think the mental aspect is equally as similar or whatever. Like you have to experience some stress or some pain, unfortunately, to grow, and it's not always fun, but I think the end result is what matters, and
Well,
sometimes it's hard.
I just want to applaud you for what you're doing,
Oh, thanks.
because I think you're doing something that's very important, not just to you, but to so many men who are struggling with these issues. And you in this podcast are being vulnerable. And that speaks volumes for how you're changing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's important. I feel compelled. I don't. I think it's when I went through it, I had someone I could lean on. I've already mentioned him. I think I mentioned him probably once a podcast. My buddy Chris. Thank God for him. He was sort of this beacon of light because he had been through it and he helped me through it. And I tried to just sort of duplicate that and replicate that here with this thing that I'm doing. And I know that it's helping. It's reaching folks. It's not Joe Rogan podcast numbers for sure. I'm sure of that, but maybe someday. But I know that I've gotten enough messages and enough comments from folks that I know that it is helping, and so I'm going to continue to do it. But thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. This is a great conversation. As you know, I sent you the proposed outline. The last question that I ask everybody is, what words of wisdom would you impart to a man just beginning his divorce journey?
Don't despair, stay strong, and be authentic.
I love it. That is excellent. I know you mentioned it previously, but how can people find you? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
I am an author of many books, but as I said, the two most recent ones are on sibling estrangement, and I actually reveal in Brothers, Sisters, Strangers my devastating loss of a relationship with my only brother and how we repaired that relationship in the wake of so much mistrust and betrayal. That's called Brothers, Sisters, Strangers. The Sibling Estrangement Journal is a workbook for those who are estranged. And you can answer questions. It's a writing journal, which I advocate. I write a blog which is where you found me, psychologytoday.com. I do the coaching one-on-one. I can be reached through my website, fernschumerchapman.com, or through email, fernschumer, SCHUMER, @gmail.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Fern, for doing this. I really appreciate it. We will stay in touch, and hopefully we'll do this again sometime.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to talk to you.
Yeah. Thank you. Take care. Thank you so much for watching and or listening. Since my separation in July of 2019, I have done an incredible amount of work on myself. I've had many different therapists, life coaches, and went through different programs. I've taken all that I've learned and put it into my own program called Forged by Fire. If you are interested in having me help you navigate your divorce, please hit my website, risingphoenixdivorcecoach.com. I look forward to working with you.